They didn't sail into the storm by accident. They weren't lost. The compass worked. The engines worked. And yet, the captain gave an order that sounded like suicide. Turn the bow directly into the storm. For a moment, no one moved. Because every sailor knows one thing. You don't go toward a storm, you escape it. The waves ahead were already towering, black walls of water. The wind screamed like something alive. The sky had erased the horizon. Turning back was still possible. Turning away felt logical. Turning aside felt safe. And that's exactly where the mistake begins. Because in storms like this, logic kills ships. This is not a story about bravery, not about heroism, not even about survival. This is a story about one decision that has sunk hundreds of ships and taken thousands of lives. A decision so reasonable, so human, that most captains make it without hesitation, and they never get a second chance. The ship was already late to react. The storm had formed faster than forecasts predicted. By the time the first massive waves hit the hull, escape routes were closing one by one. Crew members strapped themselves to railings. Loose cargo slammed against steel walls. Every sound inside the ship turned heavy, dull, final. Someone shouted the question everyone was thinking, "Why don't we turn away?" It was the question that doomed other ships before them. And the answer terrified everyone who understood it. Because turning away doesn't mean running from danger. Sometimes it means exposing yourself to it. Sideways. Most people imagine storms as chaos. Random waves, unpredictable movement. But the ocean follows rules. Cruel, simple rules. When a ship meets a massive wave head-on, the force hits the strongest part of the hull. The bow cuts through water designed to be resisted. But when a ship turns sideways, even slightly, the wave doesn't hit. It lifts. And lifting is how ships die. The captain knew this. He had seen reports. He had read the investigation files. Ships that tried to flee. Ships that turned just enough to reduce impact. They were found broken in half, or upside down, or never found at all. Because the moment a wave catches a ship from the side, stability disappears. Not slowly, instantly. The storm ahead wasn't the real danger. The real danger was the instinct to escape it. Fear tells you to turn away. Experience tells you to run. Common sense tells you to avoid the worst of it. And all three are wrong. As the ship adjusted its course, pointing its nose directly into the black wall ahead, the crew realized something chilling. This wasn't courage. This was damage control. The captain wasn't choosing the storm. He was choosing the only angle that didn't guarantee death. Every second, the waves grew higher. Every second, the engines screamed louder. There would be no second correction. One wrong angle. One delayed order. One reasonable adjustment. And the ocean would decide the rest. They were about to find out whether facing the storm was enough, or if the mistake had already been made, long before the order was given. The mistake almost every captain makes in a storm doesn't look like panic. It looks like control. When the first massive waves hit, the instinct is immediate. Reduce exposure. Turn slightly. Angle the ship. Let the waves pass instead of smashing head-on. On paper, it makes sense. In reality, it's a death sentence. A ship is not designed to survive sideways force. Its strength is forward. Its weakness is lateral. When a wave strikes from the side, it doesn't just hit the hull. It changes physics. The center of gravity shifts upward. The stabilizers lose purpose. The ship begins to roll. Not back and forth, but away. And once that motion starts, you don't stop it. You correct it too late. Or you overcorrect. And then the ocean finishes what the mistake started. Investigations after major maritime disasters show the same pattern again and again. The storm didn't sink the ship. The reaction did. Captains ordered course adjustments measured in degrees, 5 degrees, 10 degrees, small changes meant to ease the impact. Those degrees were enough. enough for waves to catch the hull sideways, enough to lift instead of strike, enough to roll instead of push, enough to capsize. This is why storms don't forgive hesitation. There is a moment, short, brutal, final, where a ship must choose an angle. After that moment, every option gets worse. Not safer. Worse. On this ship, that moment had already arrived. The crew could feel it, not in charts or instruments, in the way the deck responded under their feet. The waves weren't hitting evenly anymore. They were beginning to twist the hull. That twisting was a warning, a quiet one, the kind that comes right before everything breaks. Someone suggested adjusting course, just slightly, just enough to ride the waves. It was the suggestion that had doomed others. Because riding waves works on small boats. On ships this size, it creates leverage. And leverage is what the ocean uses to flip steel. The captain didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. He repeated the order. Straight into it. Full alignment. Hold course. Because he understood the rule that separates survival from wreckage. In extreme storms, you don't minimize impact. You control direction. Facing the storm meant the ship would be hit harder, but it would be hit correctly. The bow would absorb the force. The hull would flex the way it was designed to. The waves would break, not lift. Every impact would hurt, but it wouldn't kill. The crew finally understood what the real enemy was. Not the storm, not the waves, but the temptation to make the storm feel smaller. That temptation had sunk ships with stronger hulls, better technology, more experienced crews. Because the ocean doesn't punish fear. It punishes half measures. As the ship pushed forward, the storm reached its true strength. Waves towered above the bridge. Water smashed over the bow, crushing down with the weight of buildings. Visibility vanished. Time stopped meaning anything. The only thing that mattered was whether the ship would hold its angle, because if it didn't, there would be no recovery. The next wave would decide whether the captain was right or whether the mistake had already been made. The wave that mattered most was not the biggest one. It was the one that arrived when the ship was already exhausted. Steel had been bending for hours. Engines were running beyond safe limits. Men were holding on to anything that didn't move. And then the ocean changed its rhythm. That's how sailors describe it later. The rhythm changes. The intervals shorten. The impact becomes heavier. The sea stops testing you and starts trying to end you. The wave rose ahead of the ship like a wall. Not water anymore. Mass. For a brief moment, the bow climbed higher than it ever should have. The engines screamed. The hull groaned like it was tearing itself apart. This was the moment where a slight angle would have been enough. 5 degrees sideways, and the ship would have rolled. 10 degrees, and it would have capsized. That's how narrow survival becomes. The wave hit. Not once, but in layers. First impact, then weight. Then pressure that didn't release. Water slammed over the bow, flooding the deck, hammering steel flat. Inside the ship, everything that wasn't bolted down turned into a weapon. But the ship stayed upright, because it was facing the storm, not negotiating with it. Another wave followed, then another, each one worse than the last. The crew stopped counting time. They stopped thinking about escape. They focused on one thing only: hold the angle. Hands burned, muscles failed. Fear turned quiet, not gone, but concentrated. This was no longer about courage. It was about whether physics would be respected. At the peak of the storm, something broke. Not the ship, the storm. The waves lost their pattern. The wind shifted. The impacts weakened, slightly, then noticeably. No one celebrated, no one spoke, because everyone understood how close they had been. When the sea finally began to calm, the ship looked like it had survived a war. Bent railings, crushed equipment, water everywhere. But it was still floating, still aligned, still alive. Later, investigators would say the ship made the correct navigational choice. They would write it in clean language, calm words, technical explanations. But the truth was simpler. The ship survived because it didn't make the most common mistake. It didn't try to escape sideways. It didn't soften the danger. It didn't compromise with fear. Most ships that sink in storms don't do so because the sea is too strong. They sink because someone tried to make it less scary. They turn just enough to feel safer. They adjust just enough to feel in control. And that adjustment is everything the ocean needs. This ship didn't win. It endured. And the only reason it did was because one decision went against instinct, logic, and comfort. Not by being brave, but by refusing to make the mistake that looks like the right choice. When the storm passed, the ocean didn't leave wreckage behind. It left silence. The kind of silence that only comes after something tries and fails to kill you.